Hello, my name is Annalise Barnes, and I am in Education 6000, Foundations in Education and Learning Theory. This week we have been talking about how the brain processes new information. So I made a newsletter called How Do We Process Information? The first theory I want to talk about is the information processing theory. This one looked at the processing of info in a different way, whereas previously people that came from the behaviorist school of thought that something happens in the environment, people respond to that stimulus, whereas with the information processing theory, it's more of a multi-step process where there's a lot of activity going on. Our brain, believers of this theory, believe more that our brain is working like a machine or a computer. So, as an example, when there's stimulus in the environment, the brain is attending to that. They're paying attention to the stimulus. What's happening first is, can this new information be related to the knowledge that the brain already has? Does that information get stored or does it get forgotten? And if it does get stored, what kind of retrieval techniques can be used to remember it? So down here at the bottom, it shows, so first we have a stimulus. Second part is input processes, storage processes, output processes, and a response. So with the input, it's really any stimulus, object, data, anything that the brain is coming into contact with. And this can be both externally, like weather, or internally, like if someone experiences a fight or flight situation, that's the stimulus they're dealing with. So it can be inside their body or outside. But the input now is how is their body making sense of it? In the middle there, the purple box, the storage processes. There's a couple different types of storage in our brain. Does it move to the storage phase or does it get forgotten? An example of short-term memory is if we're performing an immediate task, like taking notes. If I'm taking notes in a classroom, I have to go through the action of taking the notes in order to help me store it in the short-term memory. An example of an output process, which is an action caused by the input. So going back to the fight or flight situation, one process of output could be if someone makes that decision to run from something that's scaring them. That would be an example of an output. And then finally the response. So as far as the three different components to our cognitive storage, we have the sensory memory, the short-term memory, and the long-term memory. The sensory memory holds information for so short of a time it's not even enough for us to really recognize that we're storing it. It could be just half a second. After that, after the sensory memory, we have short-term memory, which is information a person is actively thinking about. So for me, in my short-term memory, is processing information, because that's what I'm actively thinking about right now. Furthermore, there's some techniques we can use to try to retain that information for the long term. Chunking, so that's something that teachers can teach their students, where you're grouping information that's similar together. That's an easier way it's not just it goes beyond rote to memorization, but it's a way to get people to meaningfully remember something. Another way to improve the ability of us to remember information and to store it in the long term is meaningfulness. Is how are we going to relate that new information to information we already have? The other theory that I wanted to discuss is multiple intelligences, which is something that came about in the 1980s with William Gardner. He was a Harvard student, and I believe he taught at Harvard later. He believed in the fact that we all all right, with Dr. Gardner's multiple intelligence theory, he believed more that what our brains can do should not be measured solely by an IQ test. He believed that there were 8 different types of intelligences, and I believe now 9. I think they've added existentialism as one of them. But so he believed that there were 8 different types of intelligences, and that everybody in their own way has a little bit of every intelligence, but different levels. So someone that is excellent working with numbers and algebra and space is going to be mathematical and logical, maybe more over someone with compassion and empathy and more of an attention on other people who would be probably having more strengths with their interpersonal intelligence. So with Dr. Gardner's theory, rather than having a classroom with strictly auditory learning like many of us used to learn, just the teacher up front teaching the lecture, students sitting there listening, taking notes, the multiple intelligence theory wanted educators to go beyond that. Really, just like this picture shows, not just have people be listening to instruction, but learning it with their hands, experiencing it. That's how people retain information long term. The 9 types of, I did include the most recent edition of existentialism. So the 9 multiple intelligences that Gardner believed in: verbal linguistic, mathematical logical, visual spatial, musical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, naturalist, and existentialist. My little article on the bottom here, my little quote, what's the hoopla with kinesthetic learning? I just wanted to do a little article about why it's so, why there's such an emphasis on hands-on learning now. Really connecting knowledge in the brain to what your body is doing absolutely makes the learner have a closer connection, and it allows the brain to retain that information as well. The quote on the side, I thought it's so applicable to multiple intelligences. Ben Franklin said it best: "Tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn." I think with either of these theories, it goes back to how active of an experience is the learning for the student. And the more engagement, excitement, the more hands-on experience, all of those things are going to make for a more meaningful education. One that caters to all of our students' differences in learning as well. Thank you for listening, and have a good night.